I never thought I'd be that guy, the one whose wife cheated on him. But here I am, sitting in what was once our cozy home, typing out the sordid details of my life as it crumbled around me. My name is Greg, and I was married to Sarah for nearly 10 years. We had a house in a nice suburban neighborhood, a couple of dogs, and a seemingly perfect life. At least, that's what I thought. Things started to change a few months ago. Sarah, who was always the type to plan everything, suddenly became unpredictable. She started working later, claiming she had new responsibilities at work. I tried to be supportive, but I couldn't shake this nagging feeling in my gut. I noticed she was dressing differently, more provocatively, and her phone seemed glued to her hand. When I would ask about it, she'd brush me off with a dismissive wave. "It's just work, Greg. You're being paranoid." I hated that I felt this way, but my instincts were screaming at me that something was off. Ultimately, it was a stupid mistake on her part that led me to the truth. One evening, I came home from work early, planning to surprise her with dinner. As I walked in, I noticed the living room was unusually tidy. Too tidy, if you ask me. When I walked into the kitchen, my heart dropped. There it was, a receipt for a romantic dinner at a fancy restaurant where I knew she had never mentioned going. The date, just 2 nights prior. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I put two and two together. My mind raced. I thought about how Sarah had been acting, the late nights, the secretive phone calls. It all made sense now, and it felt like a punch to the gut. I was furious but also devastated. I did what any rational person would do. I held on to the hope that I could confront her and hear a reasonable explanation. When she returned home, I was waiting for her, my stomach twisted in knots. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked at me, her eyes widening slightly, but she chuckled nervously. "About what? Did you have a long day?" "About your dinner on Wednesday," I replied, watching her face pale. For a moment she looked like a deer caught in headlights, then she quickly recovered. "Oh, that was just a work thing. You know how it is, networking." I didn't even want to hear her excuses. "Save it, Sarah. I saw the receipt. Who did you go with?" Her demeanor shifted instantly. The feigned innocence melted away and a defensive edge crept into her voice. "It's not what you think. You're being ridiculous, Greg." We went back and forth, her attempting to dismiss my concerns while I pressed for the truth. It was a chaotic mess of accusations, denials, and her insistence that I was imagining things, but I knew, I could feel it in my bones. When I finally cornered her about the identity of her dinner companion, she cracked. "Fine, it was with Mike, my realtor, but it's not what you think. He's just a friend." I nearly laughed at her pathetic attempt to downplay it. My heart was breaking, but I was also enraged. Mike, our realtor, so many things clicked into place. The late-night calls, her sudden interest in selling our house. She must have been using him as a way to escape our marriage. The emotional impact hit me harder than I could have imagined. I felt betrayed, angry, and utterly crushed. My mind raced through every moment in our marriage, questioning every smile, every touch. I had trusted her completely, and she had shattered that trust in an instant. As the reality of her affair sank in, I felt a strange resolve forming within me. I was done with just being the guy who would cry in the corner. I decided I would take charge of my life. I needed to make a plan. But first, I needed to gather all the evidence. I began to track her movements, not out of some twisted desire to catch her in the act, but more to give myself some form of control in this chaotic emotional storm. I wasn't ready to confront her again just yet. I wanted to make sure I had all my ducks in a row. I didn't know it then, but this would set off a chain of events that would change my life forever. For the next few weeks, I became a ghost in my own home. I was there but not really present, watching Sarah from the sidelines as if I were an audience member in a never-ending drama. She continued her charade, acting as if everything was normal. The late nights stretched into weekends, and I found her out more often than not. I saw her texts light up her phone, her face lighting up in a way that I hadn't seen in years. Except those moments weren't meant for me anymore. They belonged to Mike, the realtor turned lover. I started doing some digging. I found out that she had been meeting him not just for business but for pleasure. The more I discovered, the more the pieces fell into place. They had dinner together multiple times, and she even spent weekends away, claiming it was work-related. I couldn't believe how easily she lied to my face. One particular evening I decided to follow her. She had left the house in a rush, saying she was meeting Mike to discuss some urgent paperwork. I grabbed my keys and hopped into my car, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I trailed her to a swanky restaurant downtown. My heart raced as I parked down the street, concealing myself behind a large SUV. I watched her walk in, dressed in a form-fitting red dress that showed off her curves that were meant for me, not him. I couldn't help but feel the pang of jealousy mixed with anger as I pulled out my phone to take a picture. This was evidence. I needed to document just how deep her betrayal ran. After a few minutes of watching her laugh at the table with Mike, I had to turn away. I didn't want to see any more than I already had. I felt sick to my stomach. That night, I returned home with a heavy heart. I poured myself a drink and stared at the walls that had once felt like a safe haven. All the memories we had shared in this house, the laughter, the love, it was all tainted now. I knew I couldn't live like this anymore, constantly wondering when the next betrayal would hit me. I needed to think about my future, and I had a serious decision to make. It was clear that I couldn't confront her until I was prepared. I started to plan my revenge, but not in a way that would involve screaming matches or petty confrontations. I wanted to take control of this situation, and I knew exactly how to do it. I started researching properties. After all, Sarah had been the one who wanted to sell our house to move into something bigger and better. The irony wasn't lost on me. I would take that plan and turn it into my own. I began to look at mansions, luxurious homes that would make her head spin. I envisioned myself living in one of those places, away from her and her rampant lies. As days turned into weeks, I became more and more consumed with the idea of flipping the script. I contacted a real estate agent, someone I could trust, and started the process of selling our home. I was ready to move on, but I needed to wait until the deal was finalized before I confronted Sarah about what I found. I wanted her to see what her actions had cost her. The anticipation was electric as I continued to gather evidence and finalize the sale. I took comfort in the fact that I was taking charge of my life when she had tried to take control of it in the worst way possible. I could feel a sense of empowerment washing over me as I plotted my next move. Then came the day the offer was accepted. I sat in my car outside the office, staring at the paperwork with a mix of exhilaration and fear. I knew I was about to turn my world upside down, and I felt ready. I drove home and rehearsed what I would say. I wanted to make it clear that I wasn't going to wallow in self-pity. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me anymore. When I walked into the house that evening, Sarah was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, her eyes brightening. "Hey babe, I'm so happy you're home early." I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and looked her straight in the eye. "We need to talk." I could see the smile fade from her face, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty that only fueled my resolve. I was ready to confront her about her lies and the affair. It was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. The moment I had been building up to was finally here, and I knew that everything was about to change. I watched as Sarah's eyes narrowed at my words, the smile fading into a nervous frown. She could sense the seriousness in my tone, which made her instantly defensive. "What about? Did something happen at work?" I took a step closer, steadying my breath. "You know exactly what I'm talking about." I didn't need to beat around the bush anymore. I had spent weeks gathering evidence. I was ready to lay it all out. "Greg, what are you talking about?" she said, her voice tinged with irritation, as if I were the one making this all up. "This is ridiculous. You're acting crazy." I felt anger rising within me, but I forced myself to maintain control. "I'm not acting crazy, Sarah. I know about you and Mike. I saw you at that restaurant. I saw you laughing with him, wearing that ridiculous dress. You can't deny it." Her face contorted with shock, then anger. "How dare you? You've been spying on me. You don't trust me at all." She stood up, arms crossed defensively, trying to project confidence. But I could see the cracks in her facade. I had my reasons, and right now, I couldn't care less. "About your feelings, you've betrayed me. You've lied to me for months." My heart raced, but I felt emboldened. This was the moment I had been waiting for. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "Don't even try to deny it. You've been cheating on me. I have proof, and you know it." Her expression shifted, a flicker of guilt crossing her face before she masked it with irritation. You don't understand, Mike is just a friend. He's been helping me with work stuff. I can't believe you would accuse me of that. I rolled my eyes at her pathetic attempts to downplay her infidelity. A friend. Sarah, you don't take friends out for romantic dinners. You don't dress up for them like that. You think I'm stupid. This isn't just about one dinner, it's about the lies, the deceit. I'm done with this. Her face twisted into a mix of anger and denial. So, what? You're just going to throw away our whole marriage because of some dumb misunderstanding? You don't know what you're talking about. I shook my head slowly. Misunderstanding. Maybe if you hadn't spent the last few months acting secretive and dismissive, I wouldn't have felt the need to dig for answers. You left me no choice. There was silence between us, thick and suffocating. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she realized her games were over. Greg, please, let's just talk about this. I never meant to hurt you. It was a mistake. A mistake? Is that what you call it? I put my trust in you, Sarah. You're the one who made the choice to betray me, not the other way around. I was fighting against the wave of hurt crashing over me, but I was determined to stay strong. She looked desperate now, her defenses crumbling. I just wanted to feel wanted again. You've been so consumed with work, you never pay attention to me anymore. I laughed bitterly. Is that your excuse, to sleep with my realtor, to destroy the life we built together? I thought you were better than that. She opened her mouth to respond, her eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I love you, Greg. Love, I scoffed. Love doesn't come with betrayal. You can't claim to love someone while you're sleeping with someone else. I could see the reality of her actions hitting her like a ton of bricks, and I felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. This wasn't how I had envisioned our confrontation, but it needed to happen. I had to let her know that her actions had consequences. I'm done with this, Sarah, I said, my voice firm. You've made your choices, and I'm not sticking around for this charade any longer. I've already put the house up for sale. Her eyes widened in disbelief. What? You're being irrational. You can't just leave. You can't do this. Oh, but I can, I shot back. You've taken everything from me. I'm taking back control of my life. I'm moving on, and I'm not going to let you drag me down with you. The room was silent again, her face a mixture of shock and anger. I was finally standing my ground, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Greg, please. She started, but I cut her off. I've made my decision. You have until the sale goes through to figure out your next move. I won't be here to watch it unfold. You've made your bed, now you can lie in it. I walked out of the room, leaving her standing there speechless. I didn't care what she had to say anymore. I had reclaimed my life, and the time for healing and moving forward had begun. I was ready to step into the next chapter of my life, one that didn't include her. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. The confrontation with Sarah had unraveled something within me, and I felt a strange combination of relief and heartache. I was finally free from the weight of her lies, but the reality of losing the life I thought we shared still stung. I threw myself into the process of selling our home, focusing on the practical aspects of preparing it for potential buyers. Each box I packed felt like a step away from her, from the woman I had once loved wholeheartedly. I meticulously organized everything, determined to take control of my surroundings, even as my heart felt like it was in shambles. With every piece of furniture I moved, I felt a little lighter. But there were moments when memories flooded my mind. I'd catch myself reminiscing about the times we sat together on the couch, laughing at dumb movies or cooking dinner together. It all felt like a cruel joke now. I was moving on, but I couldn't shake the sadness of what could have been. Still, I had a plan. I held on to the idea of my new life, the mansion I had scouted, one that would offer a fresh start, a clean slate. It wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of my newfound freedom. I mentally decorated the space, picturing how it would feel to walk through those grand doors, to have my own sanctuary away from the betrayal. As the last few boxes were packed and the final touches were made to the house, I received an unexpected call from my real estate agent. The offer on my home had come in, and it was a solid one. I felt a rush of excitement mixed with apprehension. Was this really happening? I was finally exiting this chapter of my life. When I shared the news with Sarah, she reacted in a way I hadn't anticipated. Rather than anger, she seemed desperate, pleading for a second chance. "Greg, you can't just leave like this. You're making a huge mistake." I stared at her, surprised by her outburst. "A mistake? Sarah, you were the one who made the choices that brought us here. You lost your chance at my trust, at our marriage. But I can change, we can work on it." She insisted, but I could see through her desperation. It was less about love and more about self-preservation. "You don't get it, do you?" I replied. "This isn't about fixing things. You broke something fundamental, and I'm not going to allow myself to be dragged back into the mess you created. I deserve better." The conversation spiraled into more excuses on her part, a desperate attempt to cling to a relationship that had been built on lies. I listened, but I felt nothing. There was no pity left for her. I was over it. I was determined to move forward. As the closing day approached, I took the time to reflect on what I wanted for my future. I imagined the mansion, the lavish parties I would host, the new friendships I would build. A life where I was free to be who I wanted to be without the shadow of betrayal looming over me. But there were still moments of doubt. I would lie in bed at night, the silence of the house plunging me into a dark abyss of sadness. I'd think about how I had once believed in her, how I had thought she was my forever. The betrayal stung, and I would sometimes wonder if I was making the right choice. But then I would remind myself of the anger I felt when I saw her with Mike, the lies that had unspooled my trust like a frayed thread. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I had an epiphany. I realized that moving to a mansion wasn't just about upgrading my living situation. It was about upgrading my life. I was reclaiming the power I had lost when I discovered her cheating. I wanted more than just a bigger house. I wanted happiness, respect, stability. I would surround myself with people who valued me, who appreciated my worth. The day of the closing arrived, and I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. I sat at the table with my real estate agent, pen poised to sign the documents. It felt surreal, like I was finally breaking free from a prison I hadn't even realized I was in. I signed the papers, and with each stroke of my pen, I felt the weight of the world lift from my shoulders. "Congratulations, Greg, you're officially a homeowner again," my agent exclaimed, a smile spreading across her face. I could hardly believe it. I was ready to close the door on the past and step into my new life. The mansion awaited me, a fresh start filled with possibilities. When I finally left the office, I felt like I was walking on air. I was no longer Greg, the betrayed husband. I was Greg, the man who took control of his destiny. I was ready for my next adventure, and nothing could hold me back now. As I drove towards my new home, I couldn't help but smile. This was it, my time to shine, to thrive, and to finally live life on my own terms. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to embrace it all. I had learned from my experience, and I was determined to make the most of this second chance. The transition from my old home to the mansion felt like stepping into a new world. The moment I walked through the grand entrance, I felt a wave of excitement wash over me. This place was everything I had dreamed of: spacious, modern, filled with light. I immediately began to envision how I would make it my own. I could finally create a space that reflected who I was, not who I had been with Sarah. The first few weeks were a blur of unpacking boxes and decorating. I was eager to transform the empty rooms into a home that felt warm and inviting. I furnished the living room with plush sofas and vibrant art, added a personal touch to the kitchen with my favorite cookbooks on display, and even set up a game room in the basement where I could unwind. As I settled in, I began to discover what it meant to truly enjoy my own company again. I would spend evenings cooking elaborate meals for myself, blasting my favorite music and relishing the solitude. I found joy in small things, like sipping coffee on the patio in the morning sunlight or watching movies in the spacious home theater I had installed. It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. There were still moments when I thought of Sarah, particularly when I was reminded of things we had once shared. I'd see a dish we used to cook together or come across a picture of us taken at a party. But those moments were becoming less painful and more like reminders of how far I had come. I had reclaimed my life, and I was no longer a victim of betrayal. As I began to embrace my new lifestyle, I started to meet new people in the neighborhood. The community was vibrant, filled with friendly families and couples. I joined a local gym, where I met some guys who quickly became friends. We would grab drinks after workouts, share stories, and bond over our mutual interests. It was refreshing to be around people who didn't know about my past, who simply saw me for who I was in that moment. One evening, while attending a neighborhood barbecue, I met Lisa, a beautiful woman with a warm smile and an infectious laugh. She was outgoing and confident, the kind of person who lit up the room. We struck up a conversation, and before I knew it, we were exchanging numbers. I felt a flutter of excitement in my chest, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Over the next few weeks, Lisa and I started dating. She was everything I needed, a breath of fresh air, a reminder that there was life beyond heartbreak. We explored the city together, enjoyed dinners at new restaurants, and spent lazy Sundays lounging by the pool. With her, I began to rediscover the joy of companionship, something I thought I had lost forever. However, there was still a part of me that felt hesitant to fully open up. I found myself holding back when it came to discussing my past, afraid that it would overshadow the happiness I was experiencing. But Lisa was patient, respecting my boundaries while also encouraging me to share when I was ready. One night after a fantastic date, we returned to my mansion, the glow of the setting sun casting a warm light through the large windows. We settled on the couch, and as we shared a bottle of wine, I felt a surge of courage. It was time to let her in to explain why I had been so guarded. "Lisa, there's something I need to tell you," I said, my heart racing. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of vulnerability and strength. "I went through a really tough situation not too long ago. I was married and my wife cheated on me." Her expression softened as she listened intently. "I'm so sorry, Greg. That must have been incredibly painful. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." I shook my head. "No, I want to. I want you to know why I've been a bit reserved. I've worked really hard to move past it, but it's still fresh in my mind." As I recounted the story of my marriage and the betrayal, I felt a weight lift. I was no longer defined by my past. I was taking ownership of my story. Lisa nodded empathetically, her eyes reflecting understanding. "Thank you for trusting me with that. It takes a lot of courage to share such personal experiences." From that moment on, I felt a shift in our relationship. I was ready to embrace the connection we had formed, ready to build something new and exciting. The walls I had built were beginning to crumble, and I was allowing myself to be vulnerable again. As the weeks turned into months, my life continued to transform. I was thriving in my new environment, surrounded by supportive friends and a blossoming romance. I began to think about the possibilities ahead of me, allowing myself to dream again. It felt liberating to finally let go of the anger and sadness that had clouded my judgment for so long. But even as I moved forward, I couldn't forget the lessons I had learned from my experience with Sarah. I became more discerning with my relationships, valuing trust and communication above all else. I was committed to ensuring that I wouldn't fall into the same traps again. As the seasons changed and the first snow fell outside my mansion, I stood by the window, watching the world transform into a winter wonderland. I marveled at how far I had come, from a man shattered by betrayal to one who was embracing a future filled with hope and possibility. I knew that life would continue to throw challenges my way, but I felt prepared to face them head on. I was no longer just a husband. I was Greg, the man who had risen from the ashes of heartbreak, determined to live life on his own terms. I had learned that while the past shapes us, it doesn't have to define our future. In that moment, I felt truly free. As winter deepened, I embraced the season with a newfound sense of gratitude. The snow-covered landscape outside my mansion felt like a blank canvas, a fresh start waiting to be painted with new experiences. I decorated the house for the holidays, filling it with lights, ornaments, and the warm scent of cinnamon and pine. This was my first holiday season in my new home, and I was determined to make it special. The neighborhood came alive with festivities. I hosted a holiday party, inviting my new friends and their families. The laughter, food, and lively conversations filled the house with warmth and joy. I felt a sense of belonging that I hadn't experienced in years, and it was exhilarating. I watched as Lisa mingled with my friends, her smile brightening the room. There was something about her that made everything feel right, and I knew that. I was lucky to have her in my life. As the night wore on, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment. I had faced the darkest days of my life, but I emerged stronger, more resilient, and ready to embrace whatever came next. The shadows of my past no longer haunted me. They served as reminders of my strength and my ability to rise above adversity. As the party came to a close, I pulled Lisa aside, wanting to share how much she meant to me. "I can't thank you enough for being in my life," I said, looking her in the eye. "You've brought happiness back into my world when I thought I'd never feel that way again." She smiled, her eyes glistening with sincerity. "You deserve it, Greg. You're an incredible person, and I'm glad you've let me in. I know it hasn't been easy, but seeing you happy is the best gift I could ask for." In that moment, I realized just how far I had come. I no longer felt like a victim of circumstance. I was the architect of my destiny. I had taken the pain from my past and transformed it into something beautiful, something that would guide me in building a brighter future. Over the following weeks, Lisa and I continued to grow closer. We traveled together, explored new places, and shared our dreams. I found myself genuinely excited about life again. My heart was open, ready to embrace love and companionship, free from the burdens that had once weighed me down. As spring approached, I began to think about long-term possibilities. Lisa and I had developed a strong bond, and the thought of building a future together felt exhilarating. One day, while walking through a blooming garden, I turned to her with a serious expression. "Have you ever thought about what comes next for us?" "Of course I have," she replied, her tone light yet sincere. "I'm excited about where this relationship is going. I see a future filled with love, laughter, and adventure. What about you?" I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of anticipation and certainty. "I want that too. I want to build something real with you. I know I've had my fair share of heartbreak, but I believe we can create something beautiful together." Her smile lit up the garden, and as she took my hand, I felt a sense of hope wash over me. This was what I had been waiting for, a chance to love again, to be vulnerable, and to embrace all the possibilities that life had to offer. In that moment, I reflected on the journey that had led me here, the pain, the betrayal, the strength I had found within myself. I had learned that while the past can shape who we are, it doesn't have to dictate our future. I was no longer defined by my marriage to Sarah. I had carved out my own narrative, one filled with resilience and growth. As the seasons changed and life continued to unfold, I knew that challenges would always be a part of the journey. But I was ready to face them head-on, equipped with the knowledge that I could rise above anything life threw my way. I had learned to trust again, not just in others, but in myself. The sun set over the horizon, casting a golden glow on the garden around us. I looked at Lisa, and in that moment I felt a deep sense of peace. I was exactly where I was meant to be, ready to embrace a future filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. Life had thrown me curveballs, but I had come out stronger and wiser. I was ready to write the next chapter of my life, one filled with hope and happiness. I had finally learned to live again,